Hey, good afternoon, good evening. If you're on the East Coast, we are the God Squad Pod. I am Dillon Cruz, the tattooed theologian. My co-host is the amazing December Rose, who dropped some poetry on us, some theopoetics on us last night or yesterday afternoon rather, on the God Squad segment on Tell Me Everything with John Fugelsang. And tonight we're very excited because we have a wonderful guest, Father Joash Thomas, a priest, a public theologian, and best-selling author of this wonderful book that I finished today, The Justice of Jesus. Drawing from his St. Thomas Christian roots and Jesus-centered and empire-informed understanding of Scripture, Father Joash helps audiences reimagine a faith that unites rather than divides. I read about that somewhere. Oh, the New Testament, right. Born and raised in India and served as a political consultant and lobbyist, three master's degrees. How do you have time for all this? 3 master's degrees. Political management from George Washington University and master's degrees from Dallas Theological Seminary in Christian leadership and theology. He is an ordained priest in the Diocese of St. Anthony and the author of the #1 Amazon Canada bestseller in Liberation Theology, The Justice of Jesus, from Brazos Press. Father Joash Thomas, thank you so much for joining us here on the God Squad Pod. We are delighted to have you, sir.
Yeah, honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I read your book. I started it last week. We were going to do this last week, but Joash was flying to the UK, and as sometimes happens on a hollow metal tube with a lot of people in it, people do get sick. So we rescheduled, and fortunately, we had an opening this week. But you are a priest that traces your Christian heritage a long way back in India, where a lot of people don't know that there were Christians a very, very long time ago. So tell us a little bit about St. Thomas Christianity in India and how that all started.
Yeah, absolutely. So my family's been Christian 2,000 years now, tracing our roots all the way back to the Apostle Thomas, who brought us good news of Jesus. But at the same time, my ancestors still believed that Jesus was already there. Christ was already present, even before news about him reached us through Thomas. So we were practicing creedal Christians for about 1,500 years before the first Western missionaries showed up, trying to convert us to their narrow ways of understanding God and neighbor that were shaped by empire. And it's a rich tradition. It used to be one unified tradition until Western colonial powers showed up with their missionaries to divide and conquer us. Today, we're about 20 different denominations. And I think that right there is an example of what colonialism does. It divides to conquer, and it does that by dividing and conquering the imagination.
Yeah. I mean, this is a show where we don't have good things to say about colonialism as a general rule.
That far.
So we're very glad that you're here and to share some of that with us. Yeah, the part in your book where you talk about the Portuguese Catholics coming over there, like they're the be all and end all, and they know everything there is to know about Jesus, and the post Constantinian Christianity does not look like St. Thomas's Christianity in a lot of ways. So that was really interesting. The first time I'd ever heard about St. Thomas being in India was in Justo Gonzalez's The Story of Christianity, this 2-volume history of the Christian religion. You talk about a lot in the book, and with very good reason, the colonizer's gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of juxtapose that against the just and liberating gospel of Jesus. So when you say colonizer's gospel, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So I give a few different tenets of the colonizer's gospel found on page 28 of my book, The Justice of Jesus. Tenet 1 is Jesus came primarily to save souls. It's just this understanding that that Jesus was more about souls than bodies being freed and liberated. Tenet 2 is justice is a worthy pursuit, but evangelism and discipleship are more important, as if the two are disconnected when in Luke 4:18, Jesus says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. And then he defines his gospel as good news for the poor and the oppressed.
Yes.
So if it's not good news for the poor and the oppressed, then it's not the good news of Jesus Christ, definitionally.
Right.
Tenet 3 is social hierarchies are natural and part of God's design. This is what empire does. It enforces these hierarchies all over the world. Stuff that doesn't even make sense. It creates these hierarchies with people at the top and everyone else at the bottom in different layers, and it divides and conquers us that way.
On that note, didn't we just talk about Daley? What's his name? Who said that the white Christian Europeans need to recolonize Africa?
Dale Partridge.
Dale Partridge. So that just goes. That's one of those tenets that you just gave, and it's in there. It's in their ethos. It's in their belief system. That social hierarchy based on race, which is crazy.
Yeah, with people like me at the top, inexplicably, because despite my 97% UK and 3% Scandinavian DNA, there's nothing special about that. But lots of people like to think there is, and that just defies my brain's capacity to understand.
But I'm sorry to interrupt you, but these are the threads. These threads are interwoven in the tapestry of all of those colonial, missions. But anyways, go ahead.
No. I mean, there's so much history here, right?
Yes.
So 100%.
Right. Yeah.
Tenet 4 is unity demands uniformity, and what I write. Yeah, what I write in there is the colonizer's gospel makes no room for diverse expressions of the Christian faith. This is why so many of the inheritors of the colonizer's gospel in North America look down on other, often more ancient traditions within the faith, like that of my ancestors.
Yeah.
The Ethiopians or any of the, any of those earlier forms before the canonization of the Bible. And so many people, what I find so interesting, so many people swear by the King James Version, like it's the law, okay? And if you tell them anything, if you say anything contrary, they're just like, you going to hell, you of the devil, you done backsliding, you would Jezebel, whatever they want to say. But they don't, that mindset itself comes from the colonizer. Because when was that published? In the 1600s?
1611.
Those scriptures, those ancient texts, those sacred texts existed thousands of years or hundreds of years or however many years before that. So to try to erase and demean, I guess, or whatever, every single version before that, or other people's translations, or all the books that they left out of it on purpose, is crazy to me. But people do, and I before I decided to ask, seek, knock, study for myself, I did the same. I can't say that I was ever on the King James only version bandwagon, but I was in the mindset that this is the way, the truth, and the light. This, no one comes to the Father but by that bandwagon. There's no other way, and that way that you've been given is also from this colonizer who squashed the way of your forefathers, who beat it out of them and brainwashed it out of them and tortured it out of them, and legislated it out. You know what I'm saying? And so people don't connect that history to the Bible, but it's there. It's there if anybody wants to see it.
I never, until I read your book, I had never thought of that first tenet as a colonizer thing, right? We've talked a lot ever since this show started. And when I wrote my first book back in 2016, 17, before it was published in 18, I talked a lot about orthopraxy being more important than orthodoxy, because orthodoxy is hard to pin down with 40,000 global denominations, but that idea that Jesus came primarily to save souls, it's like, it's just not in there. like if you read the Lord's Prayer, and I read a book years ago by John Dominic Crossan called The Greatest Prayer. It's fantastic. If you haven't read it, it's wonderful. And he's like, this is the greatest prayer because it's talking about needs for the people who are alive. It's not talking about like pie in the sky by and by. Give us bread for today and tomorrow, right? That is an embodied need. Like we can't function if we don't have food, and we can't be in community if we're not forgiving our debt, having debts forgiven. And debt peonage was such a horrible thing for most of the people that Jesus knew and hung out with, right? So like I had never really seen it termed in that way as a tenet of the colonizer's gospel. But man, when I read that, it was like, that's it. That's what it is. That's exactly what it is. And we see so much of those other tenets being foisted on America right now with the Christo-fascist and the Trump regime. Do you see that kind of thing happening in Canada as well?
Oh, totally.
Or is it okay?
Yeah. I mean, the sad thing about the American empire is that it bleeds into Canada and the Canadian empire, right? It influences the politics. I often joke about how I tell Canadians, because I'm a U.S. citizen who moved here, so I tell fellow Canadians, we're like the Tatooine of the American empire, right? There's a little bit of distance, but Star Wars metaphor there. It bleeds over. So 100%. I mean, and I mentioned this in the book as well. In this section, I say this is the same theology that undergirds the question that many of us working in the anti-trafficking space, and I've heard this both in the U.S. and Canada. We often hear this from Western church leaders in the U.S. and Canada today, which is after we share stories of children being sexually exploited 20 to 30 times a day, North American church leaders will sometimes ask, what's the point of rescuing children from sex trafficking if they don't hear the gospel and go to hell?
Yeah, when I read that, I wanted to throw some things, maybe punch a few walls, because that kind of thing, it's the kind of thing I heard when I was still in fundamentalism as a Southern Baptist. The kind of thing that said, it doesn't matter if we destroy this planet, God's going to make us a new one. And it doesn't matter if we do any of these other things, if we don't save the lost and all that. And like, if you think about it logically, if you really, truly, in every fiber of your being, believe that everybody who didn't say a magic prayer to Jesus was going to fry for eternity, it would be so crippling. The burden of that would be so crippling. Nobody would know what to do with themselves, right? And if it was all about pie in the sky by and by, then it would turn into a suicide cult pretty readily. I mean, we talked about that in seminary one day. It was like, yeah, right. So I think we've got things skewed, in a big way. But we talk about deconstruction a lot on this show because Desimber and I have both had our different deconstruction journeys, and a lot of people that we've had on the show have deconstructed, and people that listen, and but you say on page 88, deconstruction without decolonization is pointless.
Help, Holy Ghost. Help the people, Lord.
And that'll preach, but take us to church a little bit here, Joash. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, the sad reality is that so many of us deconstruct one form of empire-shaped Christianity. We supposedly move to slightly better theology, but we're still caught up in these capitalistic, and I say capitalistic because the history of capitalism is the history of colonialism, by the way, they're hand in hand.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It's right there.
Yeah.
So yeah, capitalistic, Western, and in many ways, like our postures are still the same. Inclusion by exclusion. Just
Right.
these empire-shaped ways that look nothing like the early church and the ancient ways of Jesus, that reflected, that were reflected in a lot of indigenous societies and cultures back then too, outside of Judaism and Christianity as well. So we've lost those ancient ways, that ancient wisdom, and we look down upon ancient streams of the global church, like the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church,
Right.
and we look down on their ways of worshiping Jesus. So we reconstruct, and that's my biggest critique of so much of the post-evangelical movement. It ends up, deconstructing and then reconstructing a slightly different flavor of vanilla. So instead of American vanilla, a little bit of French vanilla, but it's still vanilla at the end of the day. When there's so many other flavors out there, like chocolate, strawberry,
I want to read a little bit further from where Dillon has brought us on this part. It said to read further. It said that not only deconstruction without decolonization is pointless, but it says it does nothing for our marginalized neighbors. Yes. And this is the part I want to ask you about. It says, and to decolonize the Western church, we must start by decentering the pulpit and recentering the table, known as the Eucharistic table or the communion table in many Christian traditions. In other words, we must take the focus off the preacher and center it on Jesus. Can you just talk to us a little bit about what it means to decenter the pulpit and recenter the table? And I'm with you 1,000% on this. Yeah. I'm part of a ministry called Ecclesia that focuses on centering the table. And what does that mean in the church? If a church was going to have an epiphany and say, okay, we're going to just start from scratch and we're going to make the table the center of our ministry. What does that look like to decenter the pulpit and center the table? What does that mean to take the focus off the preacher and put it on Jesus? How would that look like in practice to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it starts by doing the thing that Jesus told us to do every time we gather, which is eat this bread, which he calls my flesh, drink this blood in remembrance of me, right? And what's fascinating is, for the first 1,500 years of church history globally, it was the table, the Eucharistic communion table, that was the centerpiece of the Sunday morning worship experience. Post-Reformation, that got replaced by the pulpit, where the table started getting moved more and more to the side, and the pulpit started getting more and more higher and more in the center. And today in the 21st century, I mean, it's the worship band, right? Mm-hmm. Where you spend probably more time in worship than even the pulpit, the preacher in the pulpit. But what happens is that empires, historically speaking, have gotten really good at colonizing and co-opting the pulpit and the preacher in the pulpit.
Mm-hmm. Especially today, where people are preaching politics, Americana, over the pulpit. Not even Jesus. They're trying to tell you how you need to vote, who you need to love. It ain't even about Jesus no more.
That's it. And the thing that gets lost in all of this is what the church believed to be, somehow mysteriously and mystically, we can't explain it, but Jesus is present at the table every time we break bread and do communion together. This might sound a little bit a critique again towards post-evangelical folks who I love dearly and are like my best friends, but sometimes folks in those circles, again, this is what I'm talking about with we deconstruct but don't decolonize. So we'll often do things like we'll have a potluck after church, and that's the same thing. Where historically it's actually not. If you go to the teachings of the early church and the Didache, like, no, it's part of your worship experience. Like, it needs to be the centerpiece of your worship experience, and not just something like, do a potluck after church by all means. That's beautiful. The early church did that too, but create space for it. Create space for the presence of Jesus in the middle of your worship experience. Close your worship experience with that, because you're then communicating to people in an embodied way that this is what it's about. It's about Jesus, and it's about receiving Jesus, not just one time in your life for a transaction, but every week for transformation, inner transformation, and through our inner transformation, the transformation of this world that God loves so much.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because Paul in 1 Corinthians was like, yo, yeah, you rich people need to stop eating and drinking all the stuff because you're leaving the poor out, and that's not what we're supposed to be doing here. And so many churches don't even have communion. I mean, some have it quarterly. When I was growing up, depending on which church I was going to, but if I was with my grandparents, I was going to the Church of Christ Church, and they had communion every Sunday, and it was one loaf and one cup, because apparently at the Last Supper, Jesus had a single cup and one loaf, and that was important to them.
And he wasn't worried about COVID.
Right. And, and then in the Southern Baptist Church where I was, living in Texas and going most of the time, it was quarterly or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And after deconstruction, and I started going to a UCC church when I was in seminary, we had communion every week. And I didn't go up there for a long time, even though it was an open table. And the first time I did, it was the first time I'd taken communion in probably 12 or 13 years, maybe more.
Wow.
And I got the bread and I dipped it in the wine and I ate it as I walked back to my seat, and my butt hit the pew and I lost it. I was crocodile tear, ugly crying in the pew, and I didn't know what on earth was happening. And the only thing that I could think of was that I had just got smacked upside the head with some grace. Some grace that said, this is something new. This is not we came to colonize, we came to just save souls. This was something for my spirit, my body, my mind, right here, right now. And post-COVID, I haven't attended worship much. That's still part of my struggle with deconstruction. But I tell you what I miss. I miss that communion. And when I've gone to church, I've gone to churches that don't center the table. The preaching is great. They have a social justice focus. There's some good music. But the table's not there. And I that kind of sticks in my craw a little bit. Because we can argue about theology and different ways of believing, and again, there's 40,000 denominations. But there are those moments, those numinous moments, like I experienced taking communion back in 2015, and I didn't know what the heck was going on with me, other than I was just sobbing like a small child. And it was one of the most profound spiritual experiences of my life. And I think when I read that, I actually wrote in my notebook the importance of recentering the table, because that had such that hit me in the feels when I read that part. And it's you're right. It goes back to that ancient tradition. I mean, Paul was writing to the first century church in Corinth about this, and how important it was to be a body of all of the people and not just the privileged people. So that was really a beautiful thing in your book. I wrote down in really big letters the law of St. Thomas. And something about that and pluralism. What is the law of St. Thomas? And tell us a little bit about that, because that's probably one of those things that the colonizer Christians, the Christo-fascist Christians, the Pierre Poilievre types. Am I saying that guy's name right?
Sorry. The comedian.
Pierre whatever. He's a politician up there from like Western Canada.
Oh,
he's
yes. Poilievre. Yeah.
Oh, Poilievre. Okay, yeah. I was saying that. Poilievre. Yeah, those types of people are not focused on the diversity of faith. They want hegemony. We talked about Stephen Wolfe again yesterday. He thinks that heresy should be punished by imprisonment because he's a hyper-Calvinist.
Who defines what that is, too.
Right, hyper-Calvinist, apparently. So talk to us about the law of St. Thomas and pluralism and why that's so important.
Yeah. So this is something I genuinely think St. Thomas Indian Christians can teach the Western Church. It's this broadening of our imagination of what to do with people of other faiths who live among us, or no faith who live among us, right? So Christendom has conditioned so many of us in the Western Church to have a very narrow imagination of it. You see someone from a different faith, and immediately your colonial instincts kick in as a Western Christian. You're like, I gotta convert them. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I gotta convert them.
Their faith is not good enough. Whatever it is, it's not good enough. You gotta convert them.
And it's to December's point earlier. You then decide what's best for them, right? Or your interpretation of Scripture. And again, it's this colonial posture of I know what is better for my neighbor. And all of my humanity. So again, it's convert or deport, convert or assimilate, go to church or go to hell, right? Or go back to where you came from, right? And we see this. This is shaping the political climate around us. And the church, the Western Church, is actively shaping this xenophobia, this hatred of immigrants.
Promoting it even.
Absolutely. With the wise people who you've name dropped here are doing it on the forefront of that movement. So so what I would say is the law of St. Thomas is this one radical idea from my St. Thomas ancestors I came across, because this one of the things I want to focus on in my PhD research, and I'm hoping to start next year, is what was it about my ancestors' faith that was so offensive to these colonial missionaries and their understanding of God? Like, what was it? And really what it came down to was my ancestors' faith just wasn't Christian supremacist enough for them.
Right.
It was more at peace with its neighbors of different spiritualities without any desire to control their spiritual journeys. So
that sounds like Jesus. I mean, because dude wasn't starting a new religion. He was super Jewish. He was just like, yo, let's be a better version of Jewish.
Yeah. Pointing us all to the light of God that was already within us. Before we even prayed the sinner's prayer, because Jesus didn't have anyone pray the sinner's prayer.
Right. This comes as a real shock to some people.
Exactly.
I have a question for you on the note of peace and peacemaking. You write and you teach extensively on this, not just your book, but also at the institution that you teach at.
Yes.
If you could remind us what that is.
Yes.
And there's, I want to point out, and I know you agree with this, there's a difference, especially in this polarized, political climate that we're in right now, both in Canada and here in the United States. There's a difference between peacekeeping and avoiding conflict. Right. And I think that a lot of Christians get that script flipped. They don't understand, or they do, that just avoidance is not the same as peacekeeping or peacemaking.
Yes.
Right? Because peacemaking often requires you to confront injustice, right?
Yeah.
Not being quiet, not sitting on the sidelines, not just going along to get along. So how do you distinguish the two, and what can Christians learn from that distinction? Like, what can Christians do to be not just peacekeepers but peacemakers? Actively engaging in peace, not standing on the wall and just watching and letting things happen. And that doesn't mean that everybody got to be somewhere marching in the street with a sign or yelling, in the face of the police or something like that. What does that look like for Christians to do? And can a Christian pursue peace without also pursuing justice? I don't think so. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think they go hand in hand. So I teach at St. Stephen's University, and we have students from all over the world, mainly the U.S. and Canada, and we have an MA program, a Master of Arts in Peace and Justice, because they go hand in hand, so it's actively about peacemaking, and I teach within that. I teach courses on interfaith peacemaking. I'll be teaching one this fall called Religion, Peace, and Justice. And again, it's so much to your point, Desimber. How do we do this in actually collaborative ways, right? And so I think peacemaking is quite active. It's not passive as peacekeeping is. And I think as Christians, the thing that shapes our peacemaking is that peacemaking will actually cost you something as a Jesus follower.
Actually, I have something I want to read about that. Keep going. I'm sorry.
No. And I mean, and that's basically chapter 2 of my book, The Cost of Just Discipleship. It's talking about, the justice of Jesus will actually cost you something. In fact, it may even cost you everything, like it did with Dr. King.
I want to read that. We're going to pause and read right from the book, from the off right now. It says the justice of Jesus is expensive. I'm going to read just a little bit. It says, justice Jesus' way is not only radically inclusive and holistic, it is also expensive. The justice of Jesus comes at a great personal cost. If seeking justice does not cost us, we are likely not doing what Jesus asks of us. After all, seeking justice cost the Good Samaritan his comfort, his personal vehicle, which at the time was his donkey, and 2 days' wages. In fact, if we're doing things right, as the Old Testament prophets John the Baptist, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and Martin Luther King Jr. did, justice Jesus' way might even cost us everything. Everything. And then you go on to talk about examples of that in the Western church, but it's expensive. And we're finding out, and when you say everything, may their souls rest in peace. What comes to my mind is Renee Good. What comes to my mind is Mr. Pretty, and so many others, that it literally did, standing up for justice actually literally did cost them everything. And I'm not saying that everybody has to do that. That's not everybody's purpose and mission and will for their life. But if you're really standing on the side of justice, it's going to cost you. It cost Jesus. Why won't it cost us? You know what I'm saying? It cost Jesus. Yeah. It's going to cost us.
And the sad thing right now is a lot of Christian institutions, churches, ministries should be showing courage in the face of empire, should be modeling a better way forward, but they won't, because they know it's going to cost them donors. They know it's going to cost them, support.
Make things uncomfortable.
Exactly, it's going to rock the boat. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't remember saying Jesus saying, if you want to follow me, make sure you revel in your comfort, or definitely don't pick up that cross over there, because that's not what follow me is about.
Don't sell everything you have, give to the poor.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Joel Osteen, I'm asking you right now for a gift, Joel Osteen, and Jesus said everybody that asks, you're supposed to give. So where show me the money and whatnot. What one of the most convicting things about the book, and I have said this to other guests on this show too, because here's where I have a real problem. Praying for my enemies. Because right now, there are people that I would consider enemies doing grievous harm to people I love, to the planet that I love and live on. And the only thing I can pray for them is that they get smacked upside the head by grace so hard in some kind of way that they about face and do something.
Violent grace.
Right. Like I have in one of my books, I have a prayer for Donald Trump that basically says that I hope that he gets annihilated by grace and then stands up before the whole world and goes, you know what? Everything I was doing was wrong. And I'm now going to divest my wealth and make it right. Like that's the prayer I can pray.
Now that would be a miracle.
But I've got compassion fatigue for these people.
Yeah.
I've got something in me that's like, no, fuck them people.
Yeah.
Not to put too fine a point on it, right? Yeah. Because of the harm that they are perpetuating. But you said in your book that praying for your enemies has changed you.
Yeah.
Say something about that. Take me to church, because I have help us, Father Thomas. You're our only hope.
Yes.
It's another Star Wars reference. We're just going to throw some out there tonight.
I'll point
help us.
Jesus. Yeah. It has changed me. Whether it's, I was once healing from from the ending of a really toxic relationship, and it was a brutal experience. Even though it had to end, and it was liberation on the other side, it was not something I anticipated, planned for, and the way it ended, it did me quite dirty. And I'm processing this pain with my Pakistani Muslim therapist, not a Jesus follower. Intentionally, I was like, my pipes are broken. I need a damn plumber. I don't give a shit what he believes.
Right.
Can you do the job? That's what I need to know.
And quite literally, it was this Pakistani Muslim therapist of mine who's just like, Joash, I know you're a religious person. Have you considered praying for your oppressor?
He's probably like, that's the last thing I considered. No.
and I felt like Jonah. I felt like, where can I go to escape the presence of God? Here's my Pakistani Muslim therapist giving me the most profoundly Christian advice. Have you considered praying for them? And he was like, no, there's actually a bunch of science that says that you pray for the people who've harmed you, you're submitting it to a higher power, and that does something for you that helps heal you. It's also I've also learned that from survivors of human trafficking that I've interacted with. One particular survivor, her name's Ruby, really changed my life with her story. She's in the Philippines, and at the age of 16 was trafficked into cyber sex trafficking den in the Philippines. And she speaks up. I mean, she's rescued by local police and local church Christians who find her. She's restored through intensive aftercare therapy process. And then in that process, she testifies against her perpetrators in court for their accountability. And then after the judge passes the sentence, she goes up to her perpetrators and says, against the advice of her lawyers who were like, this is going to re-traumatize you. You shouldn't do this. She was like, no, I insist. I have something to say. So she goes up to her perpetrators, says, I just want to let you know what you did harmed me and wasn't cool at all. And I'm glad you're getting the justice you deserve. Also, I've met this person in my restoration process named Jesus, and Jesus has transformed my life. And you know what? I think you need Jesus too, because you're harming people. And one more thing, I forgive you. Jesus has given me grace to forgive you, and I'm not doing it for you, for just you. I'm doing it for me and my healing restoration too. And that's it. And it was actually so restorative to her that lawyers in the Philippines, government lawyers, now make that offer to survivors of trafficking, because they've learned from
Oh, wow.
the survivor. They tell other survivors, hey, this is an option. You don't have to do this. You get to choose if you want to do this. But if you want to have a reconciliation meeting where you say you forgive them and speak your truth to them as you do that, we've seen from our experience with other survivors that it has been healing for them. And so again, I've learned from neighbors on the margins in this. But I'll say this to your question, your specific question of, I don't know how to pray for my oppressors. I want to pray for my enemies. I don't know how to, right? There are a few models in Scripture. One model is Jesus praying, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do.
Sure. Yeah.
That is one model. The model, of grace that you prayed, smack them with grace, God. I think that's a very graceful prayer. I would also say that the imprecatory prayers in the Bible are there for a reason. The Psalms,
right.
of the Psalms that we don't know what to do with, because they're like, what, dash the heads of our enemies' kids against the rocks. You're like, whoa.
Right. Yeah,
But
they don't sound a lot like Jesus a lot of times.
Yeah. And so there's a place to pray those prayers too. And it's okay. There's grace. God still smiles on us. God's love still covers that. And God understands. Jesus understands. Of all people, Jesus understands that righteous rage within us when we can just bring ourselves to pray that.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hard. And, we talk about victims of violence and assault and all kinds of things, and racialized systems of oppression. And some people are like, don't tell me how to meet my oppressor. Don't come at me with your Martin Luther King inspired nonviolence. I need some Stokely Carmichael. I need some Malcolm X. And as a white person, I'm not here to tell you how to meet white supremacy head on, because I'm over here doing my part as a white person who grew up in that white system to dismantle that system to the best of my ability as a person who has, started to figure some shit out slowly, right? It took way longer than I wish it had, to be frank. But you're in kind of a unique position, because you are a person who was born in a place that had been colonized. As you say, your people had been colonized, and then you moved you colonized the colonizers, kind of, as I've heard it termed from people in the global South. And so how does that experience of seeing both sides of things shape your theology and your striving to enact the justice of Jesus?
Yeah. So I am both a survivor, a child of colonization, and a beneficiary of colonization. I say that in the book. I became a beneficiary of colonization the day I started living in America at 18, and then in Canada at 28, when I started living on stolen land, and started enjoying the benefits of not just stolen land from our indigenous neighbors, but stolen wealth from the global South, and stolen labor off the backs of our Black neighbors, both in the US and Canada, right? And so that makes me a beneficiary of colonization too. And again, like, what do I do with that? Well, I can't change the past, but I can be faithful in the present. And faithfulness in the present is what Jesus calls us to. So many of us get wound up in this idol of success that, we don't know how to be faithful because we're so caught up worshiping mammon and the success and growth that it offers to us, the idol of growth. But Jesus doesn't call us to that. And those are good things. Like, effectiveness, success are nice things to have, but that's not what Jesus calls us to. Jesus calls us to be faithful, and it's for us to discern with the Spirit what faithfulness in our context looks like. And I can't do that. No religious leader can do that for the everyday Jesus follower. We have to do that work for ourselves with the Spirit and community.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it, because so many of us in America, in particular, Americans don't travel as much as, say, Europeans do, and so many Americans have never been able to get outside of the mindset of America, Americana, and stuff like that. I have been fortunate enough to go to some places, to do some things in the global South, and some of those were mission trips, or Casas por Cristo kind of things, where helped build a home for a Mexican family. They were extremely happy to get an actual house and not some stacked up pallets with cardboard tacked up to the side, and all of that kind of thing. But so many of us, as Dr. King said, we think that we have everything to teach everybody else, but we don't have anything to learn from them, in his amazing speech Beyond Vietnam. And that is so true. So when you bring this child of colonization, beneficiary of colonization perspective, to me, that sounds a lot like grace. Because then you can share that perspective with people who haven't had that experience. And one of the things that you bring up in the book is that Western Christians, we don't hear about global South Christians and their theology, their what's happening in their worlds. We might hear things that give us pause because they sound a lot like things that we don't agree with here, say the way Uganda treats LGBTQ plus people. But we don't take that time, and we don't hear those voices. And that's why you can have people standing up and say, we need to deport all these people that are coming, and we can't offer them asylum. 90% of these people are Christians, right? And the church in America is growing because of who?
Immigrants, right?
Right. It's, the immigrant churches are the ones that are growing, and the church in the global South has been growing.
Yeah.
And Western Christians are just like, no, I don't hear you, I don't see you, I don't care, unless they can go take a selfie on a mission trip.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's hard to fight that white supremacy that's conditioned us to think that. Willie James Jennings talks about this, right? The colonial posture of being teachers versus learners. And I quote him on this in the book as well. But again, like, we're conditioned to be like, no, missions goes from here to there. When in reality, if the Eastern Church hadn't, come to India or Europe, we like Christianity is an Eastern religion, historic, right? And it still is. It's stronger in the East than it is in the West. It's stronger in the global South than it is in the global North. But because we've stolen their wealth from the global South and exploited peoples, as slaves, as immigrants, refugees, we worship Mammon and not Jesus. So it's harder for us to cultivate the eyes to see Jesus among the disinherited and the disempowered. And that's why we need to decolonize our lenses.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to read a part from your book because, especially in the conditions that we're in politically and otherwise, we got the wars going on, we got the economy doing the roller coaster thing that it's doing, people playing millionaire and billionaire games with the economy that's affecting people on the ground. And we have a lot of people that might be questioning more than their faith, and they may not even just have the energy for justice, beyond just surviving in their own life, in which we understand. But there's a part in here where you're talking about that persistence pays off. And I just want to read a little bit of that and ask you a question on the other side. You say, there are no overnight wins in justice advocacy work because we seek to topple the old order of things to make way for God's new creation. We are met with resistance, and effectively undoing and replacing systems of the old order of things which oppress our marginalized neighbors will take both time and patience. In a world that seeks instant gratification and quick results, the long haul work of advocacy for our marginalized neighbors is countercultural. Still, persistence on their behalf is the way of Jesus. And just, we only have a few minutes left, but just quickly tell us, what will it take for us to remain persistent? The scriptures say, be not weary in well doing. And that is easier said than done, but certainly doable. But it's harder and harder to do when you're waking up and facing the things that so many of us are facing. What would be your word to any of those listening that are finding it a little bit hard to be persistent, a little bit hard to persevere, a little bit hard to remain hopeful, a little bit hard to sustain joy? As a shepherd, as a faith leader, what would be your word to those about this persistence that we need to have in our purpose toward peacekeeping, peacemaking, justice, and joy?
Yeah, such a good question. I'd say that this is why our inner lives matter so much as peacemakers. The spiritual practices, disciplines, rule of life, whatever helps you stay connected to our source of joy and life. It's important because I think when we stay grounded in our spiritual practices and prayer, we're reminded of, we know how the story ends.
Yes.
Like Dr. King said, the moral arc of the universe is long and it bends towards justice, right? So this is what happens. This is how the story ends. It ends with Jesus returning to make everything right that empire has broken, to wipe away every tear that has been inflicted by empire. And that's good news to our future selves, but even more so to our present selves and our poor and oppressed neighbors here. So the one thing I'd leave us with is this Jesuit Ignatian spiritual practice called the prayer of holy indifference, or holy indifference, which is basically this prayer of, God, make me indifferent to every outcome except that which is your will. And, this is what's beautiful when I look at the lives of the saints, Oscar Romero, Martin Luther King, Desmond Tutu, and saints outside the church too, like Malcolm X, people who stood up for what was right. They had this posture, like you see this in Dr. King's speech the night before he was assassinated, the mountaintop speech, where he says, I've been to the mountaintop, I've seen the other side. I may not get there with you, but I know that one day God's people are going to live in that land. Yes. And then he says, I fear no man. Like anyone, I'd love to live a long life, but that's okay. I'll still get there with you. And the next day he was killed. But he had this inner peace that no one could steal from him, right? And I think all of us need to cultivate that inner peace for ourselves and remind ourselves that this is the assignment of being a Jesus follower. This is the assignment.
Yeah, I had the opportunity a couple weeks ago to talk to Reverend Mark Sandlin. I don't know if you know who he is, but he said that he learned in seminary that the kingdom of God is a present possibility and not a future promise. And I thought, well, that flips the whole thing on its head, and it makes a lot of sense. And that sounds an awful lot like the justice of Jesus to me. And before we go, we always do something called the word on the street, and it comes from your book. I'm not going to be able to say the Dutch theologian's name because I don't speak Dutch. But she said, we're called to be the salt of the earth, not the sugar of the earth. So sometimes we ain't got to be sweet about it, y'all. But we do got to be about it. And how do you say her name or his name? I'm assuming it looks like Rosemary in English, but it's
that's right. Dutch. That's right. It's her name, Roosmaren van Tient. And I'm slightly butchering it too, I know, but she's an incredible Dutch theologian on a wheelchair, so she's disabled, and she shows up to these climate justice protests in her collar, and has taught me so much about Jesus from the short time I've spent with her.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Well, Father Joash Thomas, where can we find you on the World Wide Web of internet information and all that kind of thing?
Well, unfortunately, everywhere, but mainly.
Well, that's how I found you. I've been following you for a while. So
that's good. Yeah. No. So I'm on Instagram at Joash P Thomas. Also on Substack, Joash P Thomas or Masala Chai Theology is my Substack there. I'm writing about Celtic Christianity right now versus Augustine and comparing, contrasting the two and how it's shaped us. Always try to keep it masala spicy for us, but my book is The Justice of Jesus. It's available wherever you buy your books, reach out over social media or on my website joashpthomas.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. Folks, read this book, and if you go to a church and they're more focused on evangelism than they are on the justice of Jesus, pick you up a copy or 12 and start handing them out. This is good stuff. As you can see, I have marked it up rather heavily because there's so much to chew on in there. Thank you so much. And, if you write another book, let us know. We'd love to have you back on the show. And I'd love to, if you could send me an email about the school that you teach at and that master's program.
Same.
I might need to go to Canada or something.
If they have a distance learning program.
It is a distance learning program. So you can take it online. And it's in peace, justice, transformative leadership, indigenous reconciliation, all the good stuff. So SSU.ca. Do check us out. Yeah.
Wonderful. Excellent.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. We will be right back here next week. I think we have a guest next week too. It's slipping my mind who that is, but I think we're booked all the way through.
Amy somebody.
Okay, we're booked all the way through the end of this month, and I think also through the next month. It was the exception of the second week or first week, whereas we will be in New York with John Fuga saying "Tell Me Everything" on Sirius XM live in the studio. So I'm very excited about that. And if you don't know, our show have moved with John Fuga saying "Tell Me Everything" from 10 p.m. on Wednesdays to the 2 o'clock hour. So we are very excited about that, mainstream with that now. And of course, always we'll be right here Thursdays, 8 p.m., streaming live with wonderful guests such as the one and only Masala Chai. I had never heard of a Masala Chai theologian, but I love the way it sounds. And he's looking spicy and especially deliciously religious. And so y'all check him out and everything that he's doing. And y'all continue to stay tuned. And thank you for tuning in tonight.
Oh, and just before you go, Joash, I have some wonderful organic chai that I get from Arbor Tea. So if you're ever in Pennsylvania, you got to hit me up and I will make you a delicious cup of chai with some oat milk and some, cardamom and all the good stuff that's in there.
Yes.
Yeah. We could break some bread and drink some chai. That'd be pretty awesome if you're ever in PA.
Love that.
Excellent. All right, folks, that's our show tonight. If you didn't know you can find all the episodes where you find your podcast, and you can find John Fugelsang's show on YouTube now at Political Voices Network or something like that.
Yes.
So check that out. And we thank you for your support. Like, subscribe, and share. And enact the justice of Jesus. And get the book. Share it. Read it.
Thank you. Good night.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Blessings, friends.